Willie D Live.
It's Willie D, y'all, back with another episode of information and instructions to help you navigate through this wild, crazy, beautiful world. In the studio, Charles D. Adams. So, do you like when people add the D in there?
Oh, I don't care.
You don't care?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, don't make a shit to me.
Man, I saw you and Bun and Queenie and who was that other guy on the picture of y'all? Y'all were in Nano, Japan.
Oh yeah, we were. That was like the 2018 rally. English Andy, he's a Dallas guy. He grew up in Surrey, England, but he's a bar owner up in Dallas, and he is the fourth guy on our little rally car team that me and Bun have.
Yeah, y'all have fun with that.
Well, great time. Traveled all over the world.
Gumball 3000.
Yes, sir. You go places. Last year it was Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, the old Saigon, to Singapore, right? But we went to Cambodia, Malaysia. We went all these places I would have never gone, and that's what's fascinating about it, right? I'm not into the supercar, hypercar, that kind of rich douchebag, because you have that there, but you have different cliques of people, and you also have a lot of wonderful people. The Ja Rule came out this year. That was interesting. I'd never met him. But for me, it's about experiencing all these weird places. Like the year before or 2 years before, we went to Montenegro, which I did not know was a country at all. It's south of Croatia, but we had driven from Budapest, Hungary, all the way down the coast, kind of the opposite coast from Italy. And, stuff's amazing. It's really cool. And I'm only doing it because, Bun invited me to do it years ago, and he lets me keep coming along. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get out there one day, man. I'm testing my driver skill. I don't want to just tag along. I want to drive.
Yeah, no, we drive. We all take turns driving. It's exciting. It's not a race, right? But you're still trying to get there pretty quick. It's 3,000 miles.
You don't want to be last.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be last.
Yeah. Man, you are a trial attorney. You've been a judge. You've been a cop. As a former cop turned defense attorney, what was the moment that shook your belief in the system that you once enforced?
I never really had that moment because for me, I always intended to be a criminal defense attorney, which is in fact a practice I've recently shuttered. But when I was a kid, I spent a good bit of my childhood with my grandma, and her and I would watch Perry Mason reruns at 10 o'clock in the morning all summer long on WTBS, black and white TV. This is like the late 70s, early 80s. And I just always wanted to be a criminal defense attorney. That was always, you have this kind of naive, as a child, you're defending innocent people, when in fact, almost all of your clients are very, very guilty, right? The overwhelming majority, and you're just trying to mitigate the consequence. But that was always the plan. I did not grow up in a financial circumstance where just going to school was an option, right? I had to work. I had, everything from fry cook at Sonic. I had my own grass cutting business. I did the U.S. Census my senior year of high school. Sold furniture, worked at Radio Shack, got a job barbacking, bartending, bouncing, and literally just took a civil service exam with a buddy of mine who's now a captain with the sheriff's department here. He was going to take it. He said, man, take this test with me. And I got a perfect score and became a police officer at a very young age, which I did think would edify me I thought it would help me being a criminal defense attorney, but it was never the career plan. Having said that, I absolutely loved it. Like I had, the 90s was a different time. I loved being a policeman. And I do think that there are a great number of sincere public servants in a flawed system. And I think the demonization we've seen holistically of law enforcement over the last decade is misplaced and has led to some pretty bad American outcomes, right? That is not to suggest there weren't horrifying outcomes the other way, but it's like a pendulum. So I don't think our system is incredibly broken outside of the drug war, which I think is really to blame for decades of, by design, systemic oppression of poor people and black men of all socioeconomic classes, right? Which is what's unique about that.
Let's go back to mitigating circumstances. And when you're working with one of your clients, right?
Okay.
Because oftentimes defense attorneys get criticized for defending people who the public thinks is guilty and deserves to be severely punished. But your job as a defense attorney is to mitigate the circumstances. And in other words, give that person, it's going to be, he going to get some type of, it's going to hurt, but your job is to make sure it don't hurt as much. But what about when somebody is guilty and you smooth get them off? Like, let's say a rapist. Have you ever represented a rapist?
Yeah, I represent a number of people accused and people guilty of sexual assault.
So how do you reconcile defending a rapist?
Well, I do believe in again, I've stopped doing it, right? Yeah. I stopped doing it. I slowly shut down my practice over about 2 years.
Why did you do that?
Well, I've got other businesses that, if you're a real trial lawyer, a real criminal defense trial lawyer, you are tied to the courthouse and you have to be there all the time. It's both, it's legalistic, but it's also relationship driven. Presence matters. Your clients want to see you, not your associates. And I just, I've got another non-legal business, and then I've got obviously me and Quan LX Farrakhan have our show on Fox Soul that also airs in San Francisco and here locally. So I've got time constraints, but I also, my heart wasn't in it anymore, and a lot of it is tied to the heart of that question. I have absolutely gotten sexual assaults dismissed for clients that in my heart I believed were guilty, right? But the state could not make their case. I was very good at that very early on. I would charge more for a sexual assault than I would for a murder, right? A murder, there's some people that need a killing, right? I mean, you can justify a murder. Not always, right? But there are people that bring the bullet onto themselves, whereas there's never a justification for sexual assault. Either you're falsely accused, which is probably somewhere between 3 and 7% of the people, at the very most, right? That's being generous, of the people accused of it. Overwhelmingly, it is people that are guilty that are not prosecuted. That's typically the problem. But I've most certainly defended some innocent people, and I've defended some guilty people and exonerated them. But I fully subscribe to the belief that defense attorneys are one of the most important components in our system, right? And if you take an oath, and when I took an oath to be a police officer, I took it seriously. When I took an oath as an attorney, I take it very seriously. But your oath is to zealously represent the interests of the client. You have to put everything else aside. And if you choose to take on that representation, it is your job to try to win at all costs. And you cannot consider, your personal feelings, your friends and family's feelings, society's feelings, because if you do, you're not doing the job you're supposed to. And it really, you can trace it back in America to John Adams, our second president, who got famous in Boston because he was the only attorney in town in colonial Boston, willing to defend the British redcoats that had shot into a crowd during a protest, right? Now, they had been attacked. People were throwing rocks at him and trying to get at him, and he actually exonerated them, right? Vilified, family was threatened. We've seen that in America a number of times. And I will tell you, there are cases that I've said no to, right? After I got to position where I didn't need to take cases, financially. And there are cases that I've been put on by judges. I never really did a lot of indigent work, and I wasn't a public defender, but there are judges that'll say, hey, especially in smaller counties, I want you to do this case, where it's been pretty horrible. But again, you take an oath, and you are representing this one person fighting back against the great weight and authority of the state. Now, like I said, I did those cases. I always voted pretty high on them. That was not the bread and butter of my criminal defensive practice. Despite a lifetime of kind of radicalized advocacy for ending the war on drugs holistically, right, with the exception of crystallized methamphetamine, fentanyl, and a handful of narcotics, I think we should see full legalization, not just decriminalization, and steward people, addicts into hospitals and stuff. But, for the most part, a lot of my work was on drug cases, right? Because I always felt like, both as a police officer and as a student, at Harvard, I did my thesis on why the war on drugs is racially and socioeconomically biased and it needed to end. And during my practice, so I never really had a lot of, for the bulk of my practice, which was fighting marijuana cases, cocaine cases, heroin cases, LSD, cases that could take someone's life and completely derail it, right? Make them ineligible to be a nurse or ineligible to have any type of professional license as a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant. And the real problem with it is that typically most people are guilty of the possession they were charged with. And you have a lot of judges that are either apathetic or outright hostile to constitutional arguments. You have a Supreme Court in the Rehnquist Court, which is the Supreme Court for the decades of the 80s and 90s, that created all of this search and seizure jurisprudence just to facilitate cops searching everybody's cars and fucking with people. And then I saw that as a policeman, right? It was very easy for people to get felony arrests, pulling people over and searching their car. And the way that game would work is you pull somebody over for an arrestable offense, which in Texas is basically anything but speeding. You can arrest somebody for not using their blinker. And you say to them, hey, can I search their car? And when they say no, you pull them out of the car, you handcuff them as an inventory search of the car after you arrest them. You don't find shit, and then you just say, oh, well, I decided not to arrest you. You can go. But if you find something, all of a sudden you got a felony arrest. And that was something that even as a cop I always found repugnant, right? I just didn't. I didn't, if I arrested somebody for weed, it was because they were doing some other really fucked up shit, like breaking into cars or beating somebody up or something. And I just, well, I'm going to put that weed on you too. I threw away so much weed once I got in trouble because this other officer went and snitched on me because I just didn't give a fuck, right? And I didn't care about coke and heroin. And that's not to say coke and heroin aren't horrible drugs, right? But it's the prohibition of them causes so much more pain and consequence and crime, right, than actual using it. And it's especially aggravated in the black community, right? And that's not to suggest that black people use drugs more than white people. They don't, right? In fact, if you look at it, with the exception of Asians, the drug use of all drugs in America is pretty static in between Latino, white, and black communities. However, the prosecution is completely biased, and that's not reflected in violent crimes. We have some real disparities that I think are downstream from forced illiteracy and other things, and just people break down in homes. But taking out violent crime, when you just look at prohibition, way too much enforcement in certain communities, mostly the black community in America. And you also have people police different, right? You don't search every car in a nice neighborhood because somebody's going to go complain. But you do it all the time, and that shit's crazy. I don't know. But I never had any guilt. I don't care how guilty you are in a drug case. I didn't want the government getting their hooks in you and ruining your life, and I felt very passionate about it.
Did you ever get somebody off and they went out there and raped somebody else, and you was like, whoa? Or even maybe you represented somebody in domestic violence, and then they upped the ante and actually killed their
I don't have any
significant
clients where they killed someone after the fact. I've represented scores of people with domestic violence. I don't have anyone that I've ever heard of committing another sexual offense, but most of the sexual offenses they were hired cases. They weren't appointed cases. So they were, people accused of something grievous, but in a relationship situation or, some sort of familial situation. And I didn't take a whole lot of them because I charged quite a bit. And, you want to pay me this big giant amount of cash, I will. And the truth is, most of them are resolved. Like, in the 2000s and 2010s, early 2010s, you could go get your client polygraphed and then let the state polygraph them if they pass. There were a lot of times when fake cases would unravel. So then what you're doing on a real case is you're just fighting to get a consequence that doesn't destroy their whole life, right? But, whether it's an intensive 10-year probation, so no, I've never had a circumstance. I'm sure people have. I did not. But I didn't again, most of my criminal defense was focused on drug cases through the entire 20 years that I did it. Or how long? Yeah, right, about 20 years.
Yeah. Surmise your Harvard thesis on the racial bias in terms of drug cases.
Okay, so I built my thesis around this case that came out of Texas, Supreme Court opinion called Atwater, and this was 2001, so it's been a minute. I ain't looked at it in a long time. But there was this case, Atwater versus Lago Vista. Lago Vista is this super wealthy lakeside suburban town outside Austin, right? Mm-hmm. And a physician's wife who had kind of a long-running beef with law enforcement got pulled over and arrested for not wearing her seatbelt. Now, they ain't the people getting arrested for seatbelts. It's usually not a physician's wife. But a physician's wife can afford to fight it all the way up. And she fought it all the way to the United States Supreme Court.
Like a murder case, like she was fighting a murder case.
Right. And the substance of the issue was, is it constitutional to arrest someone and take them into custody merely for not wearing their seatbelt? And, what liberty interests are impugned? And the Supreme Court said, hey, yeah, that's fine. Now, the problem with that,
the Supreme Court agreed?
Said it's perfectly okay, right? And the problem with that is it ignores reality. It ignores how that, as I mentioned earlier, ignores how that is used in practice, right? What officers will do if they have something and they can arrest you for, and they want to search your car. They walk up and say, hey, can we search your car? And you're like, no, you're not searching my car. Fuck you, right? And then it's okay, get out of the car. And they arrest you for whatever stupid thing, and they search your car as an inventory search. And it's horrible. Our founding fathers would have never tolerated even the concept of it. I mean, they wouldn't tolerate 99%. The tax rate that they went to war on was, 4% or something? And now our aggregate tax rate is over 50% in America. We're not the same country in any ways. But this thought that everyone driving a car is just subjected to whatever crazy search police want to is contravenes, absolutely contravenes the Bill of Rights, and it's repugnant. So the whole argument is when you look at the data, right, and you look at the number of cars searched, right, and so the popular term is driving while black, and the interaction, there is extreme bias, and there is no fixing the bias. Now, the law enforcement community and the conservatives would push back and say, well, there's this bias that exists because African Americans are greatly overrepresented in the commission of crime, which, when you're looking at violent crime, is a sad truth, right? If you look at per capita violent crime, it's very skewed. But that has nothing to do with prohibition. And when you look at how many black men get pulled over for nothing and get searched, right? And let's look at the downstream consequence of that, right? You have this negative police encounter where a completely innocent guy, and it happened to all kind of people. I don't know if you ever heard the story of Clyde Drexler when he came back from Portland to be on the Rockets. I was a policeman then. Famously was pulled over in his Lexus in Galveston County on the Gulf Freeway and hassled, right?
Yeah, I missed that one.
Clyde Drexler, at the time, one of the 5 greatest professional basketball players in the world, in his hometown, where he went to the Final Four. It's just insane. So you have all these black men having these horrible negative experiences who didn't do shit, right? Just driving. And it creates this wedge that separates an entire segment of society, because you shouldn't look at cops like that. And it's all downstream from prohibition, right? Like, if you're beating the shit out of your wife and the cops come, well, you fucking know, right? You know that they're supposed to be there. You might act indignant, right? It's just like we see all these videos of these thieves nowadays who are like the most indignant thieves in the world, like screaming and yelling, like, how dare you arrest me? That shit's all insane.
You're talking about Trump?
And I'm just talking about the anecdotal evidence on social media. That shit's crazy, right? People seem entitled to steal. But we have this huge wedge. And we also have the idea that's propagated, in hip hop culture. You better not snitch. You better not interact with the cops, right? And I've always wondered, what's the root of that? Because really, if you're the government, right, and you're the evil people pulling the strings that none of us ever see, wouldn't it make it better for the government if, with the rare exception of when an African American kills a law enforcer or somebody they want to protect, wouldn't it make it better for the government, for the black community, not to want law enforcement in their community? It just makes their job easier, right? And it's crazy, because who suffers the most from real crime? Right? If we did away with drug enforcement, with the exception of narco terrorists and, real big shit like fentanyl and meth, and we just focused on making communities safer. So we had no more negative interactions. If you get pulled over for driving crazy, you get your fucking tickets and you go on. There ain't no searching your car, hassling you, making people see police as the bad guys who dehumanize them. And instead, cops just focused on victim crime. It would be an incredible benefit to Black America, right? Because racists love to talk about how, when you look at the data, how Black males commit an outsized portion of crime. What people don't talk about is who are the victims of that crime. It's almost overwhelmingly Black men and Black women. Right? And when you talk about the higher percentages, it's still this small fraction. It's a larger fraction, right? But it's still a hugely small fraction. And if we had police that's whole job was to just make communities safer, right? And you allocated police resources that way, then the overwhelming majority of police resources would be dedicated to African American communities. And the people that fucking suffer, right? And, I went to, of the 7 elementary schools I went to as a poor kid, the one I went to longest was predominantly African American, right? And the people that suffer, whether it's the huge outsized rates of violent misbehavior in inner city schools, or just living in communities that are beset by crime, are law-abiding African Americans. And no one talks about them, right? And then, well, how does that impact worldview, mindset, all this stuff, or just fucking opportunity? So when you look at this whole don't snitch, don't talk to the fucking police, a lot of it, obviously rooted in disparate treatment and systemic racism that existed for decades in the United States, but has largely, especially in big cities where we have, African-American administrators at almost every large department and with a lot more diversity, it's been resoundingly pushed back. There needs to be a different conversation. And the way you have to change it, square one, is ending this drug war. And of course, Texas, we're fucking ramping it up. I don't know if you've seen the news from this week that now all of a sudden we're ramping up marijuana enforcement
Before we go down that
Yeah.
road, because I did want to touch on that,
yeah,
because
it's
I'm
fucking
glad
crazy.
you mentioned that. I do want to touch on that new law that they just passed. But I want to say this. I do not believe that black people commit the majority of violent crime.
Well,
I absolutely do not believe that.
I mean, you're wrong.
Yeah,
And it's not always the
hold on.
majority.
This is what I'm saying. I believe that just like black people don't commit the majority of traffic infractions, just like black people don't commit the majority of welfare fraud, black people are just accused more. And that's why, and black people are accused more and they're prosecuted more for these crimes. They're not committing these crimes at a rate substantially higher than any other group. That's why when I hear these people, I read a lot of comments online, and anytime there's a situation involving a black person who's accused of committing a crime, or actually is in commission of a crime, we watching them commit the crime, somebody will invariably say, the 13% again. The 13% again.
But
And that's
the
based
usual
on the
suspects is what
usual
you-
suspects,
yeah,
right. It's the 13%. They got 13% of the population, but they were committing the majority of the crime. That is a damn lie. That if you think about it, it don't even make sense. What happens is this. Black people, this society that we live in, holds black people's worst as an example of who we are collectively, and they hold their best as an example of who they are collectively.
Well, I think there's an argument that can be made that both ways, right? Like, I think that was clearly the case for decades. I think that now, at least on a macro scale with media and everything, I think we try to, and with government, I think we try to push, everything that white people did historically. We're going to focus on the bad and discount the good. I think we have a pendulum that goes from one extreme to another. But you're wrong, unfortunately, about the data on some violent crime, most violent crime.
And where does this data come from?
Well, so
who's calculating this data?
Well, here's the thing: when the FBI and law enforcement
who is targeting blacks for failure?
Hold on.
Go ahead.
But what we found from looking at the data, because there's been an effort to unpack it and suggest that there's overrepresentations because of the problem in the data, what turns out is that there are a great number of people of color wrongfully misidentified as white. So it did caused more harm for those and caused a greater disparity. But there are truths, right? The truth is that African American men commit murder at a much, much higher rate than every other, if you break it just down to the mutable characteristic of complexion, of race, right? And you chunk in like Afro-Caribbean and all this.
That's not true.
Okay. I get that.
That is absolutely not true.
But it is true.
You know what's happening here is that what we see the murder we see the video clips when black people kill each other. We're seeing a lot of stuff like that, that hits our subconscious and make us think that that's who doing all the killing. But when white folks kill, they kill in droves. Black people.
That's actually wrong as well. It's a popular myth. So the media
who is the usual suspect when there's a mass shooting?
Okay, so this is a popular effort in the media and the Biden administration as well. So what we do now with data is they have parsed it between mass shootings and multiple shootings, right? And they put it in the mass shooting bucket if they've decided that the motivation was political, racist, whatever, right? And they just put it in the multiple shooting bucket if they think it's just crime. And they don't tend to look at the motivation when it is an African American that has committed this multiple shooting. The people getting hit by the bullets, they don't give a shit, right? If you're getting hit by bullets with a bunch of other people, no one cares what the motivation is. You don't want to get shot. African American men commit right about half of, and this is not per capita, this is, total aggregate, about half of the murders in America, and they commit about half of the multiple, if you combine multiple shooting and mass shootings. The only way you get this outsized presence for white men is if you look at just motivation. That's when the Biden administration is very careful to say, white men are most responsible for political violence. Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman.
Oh, we counting police murders? Because police kill about 1,000 people a year.
Police actually kill far less people,
and mostly white police officers.
Right, but officers are murdering at a much lower rate than they're getting murdered.
What's
right?
the number?
I'd have to pull it up. Okay, but the reality is, we need better law enforcement in America. I could give you an hour of what's wrong with law enforcement, but we don't need to have when we have dishonest conversations about the rate of crime. It actually is a disservice to Black America. And in fact, I think it is racist in its nature to suggest that it's, because I don't think it's complexion driven. Like, I don't think.
You don't think what is complexion driven?
I don't think the outsized amount of violence in the Black community has anything to do with the racial identity of being Black, right? I think just like there are plenty of people that now say, white people are this, right? Because you can do that in society, right? You can do it on it. So you go to the Fox Face-Off Instagram. If someone were to say something racist about a Black person, they are immediately thrown off Instagram. Whereas me, I'm called every name in the book constantly, right? It's okay to demonize.
I don't know about that, Charles. I see people talking stuff about Black people all the time.
No, I get it.
Including Black people.
Right. I do get it, but they're like pejorative words, right? You can use any racial pejorative for a white person. And we have this, and I'm not playing victim. We have this double standard. But here's the thing. None of it has to do with our skin color, right? Like I thought, you have there's no shortage of white racists, right? That, and I think we find a lot of them liberals, right? This myth that
I think
Black.
it's about equal.
So when you look at, liberals and conservatives, but when you have this myth that when you look at the numbers like the SAT or the ACT, and you have this statistical argument that Black people just can't compete, so we have to do away with this test, or we have to do away with this metric or this barrier. We have California and Massachusetts doing away with honors classes, and it's all built around this concept that Blacks just aren't able, right? Which is incredibly racist, right? And when you look at a couple of things, right? You look at the Nigerian performance, right? Foreign-born Nigerian performance in elite academia. It's fucking off the charts, right? It's right up there with Jewish overperformance, right? And then you consider the forced illiteracy in Black America for centuries, right? People don't talk about that. For centuries during the transatlantic horror of slavery, throughout the South, Black slaves were not allowed to learn to read, right? And so when you finally broke those chains and instituted new chains of Jim Crow, right, you didn't have the same intensiveness. And everything, every fucking study says you get books in kids' hands and you make them fucking read when they're little, they're going to perform just as well as other kids, right, that have had the same. And when you look at the numbers of Black parents reading to their children versus white parents reading to their children, right, it's drastically different. And I think it's all downstream from this forced illiteracy. But if we don't have a fucking conversation, it's never going to get fixed, right? Instead of saying, oh, well, we're just going to do away with these tests, or we're not going to have this metrics, or we're just going to have this built-in affirmative action bias for forever, it doesn't fix any of the fucking problems. And it's the same thing with crime. When you say, oh, yeah, we're not, there's not more African-American violent criminals per capita or even in gross numbers than other communities, it's nice to believe, it's nice to say, but it doesn't help Black America. And my whole thing is, let's make the reality of Black Americans better. Like I used to tell kids when I was the presiding judge for a city for 9 years. And I would always sit on my juvenile docket and let my associates sit. It's a bullshit docket, right? Traffic and low-level crimes. But I used to teach Latino and black kids. I'd teach white kids too, but I just found myself doing it more on how to successfully navigate an encounter with law enforcement, right? How to, from the stem to the stern to get out of it safely, right? And then I had a bunch of people start accusing me of white savior, just fucking shitting on me all over fucking Facebook. Lawyers talking shit that it was somehow racist of me to try to explain to people how they should get through the situation without getting killed. I don't give a fuck, right, about anything other than the outcome. Tell them how not to waive their rights, but don't physically object. Don't give them permission to search the car, but always be super respectful. And then people, why are you telling them to be respectful of law enforcement? I don't give a fuck about the law enforcement's feelings. I don't want a 16-year-old kid getting fucking shot, right? And that's the same thing with generally, right? I don't think we do America any good, and I don't think we do black, because crime is almost completely racially homogenous, right? Racially and socioeconomically. I don't think we do black America or all of America or white America, any America any good by having these false conversations about the reality of crime. And I get why, as a black man, you don't want to hear it, and there are concerns.
No, I can hear it. I can hear the truth, and I know what the truth is. I know that I'm never going to believe the statistics of a person who targets me for failure. I'm never going to take the data of an organization or an agency that wakes up every morning with the idea of targeting me for failure. Why would I pay attention to that data that subjugates me on a daily basis? Why would I try to do? Why that don't even make sense. It's like trying to. It's like going somewhere to get information and learn from somebody to better yourself who is targeting you for failure. If somebody won't treat you right, they won't teach you right. So I don't believe the data. I don't believe. You're asking me to believe the data from the law enforcement, who is the primary organization that targets black people on a daily basis. On a daily basis, who violate black people's rights on a daily basis. They are the reason why black people have a certain code of silence, because they don't trust them. They would rather trust the guy who is in the neighborhood, destroying the neighborhood on a daily basis, before they trust the guy who ain't from the neighborhood. But when he comes around, he's always menacing. He never comes with positive energy. He only shows up when something bad happens. He never says anything nice. He's always throwing his weight around. Every time he opens his mouth, it's in an authoritarian manner. Why would I trust that guy's data? That don't even make sense.
I don't disagree with your perspective. Right? I don't know your perspective, right? And I agree
My
with...
perspective is I don't believe the lies.
Okay, again...
And I think all of that data that come from the FBI, the CIA, law enforcement, all of that stuff, I don't believe none of it, because these are the same people that are marginalizing us. Well, it's the same people that are targeting us. Why would I believe their data? That don't make sense.
The lived experience of many black Americans in neighborhoods just controlled by crime also refute that. But you can believe the data or not believe the data, and I think it's actually skewed your way more than it is the law enforcement's way.
And why do you believe that?
Well, because I think that the default is to say white, right? And there was an effort with the Biden administration. They changed
now that's
reporting.
being dismissive.
Well, hold on. The Biden administration last fall had to completely redo their numbers quietly. There was no press release by the FBI, which is very unusual, because they were actively playing with numbers to have more politically correct results. And that's awful, right? We need true numbers. But I think you hit the nail on the head with, and I think the culture and the whole don't snitch stuff has caused far more harm than good. But I do agree, and I think this comes back to my issue with the drug war. When every time you interact with a cop, when you're even if you're a weed smoker, right? And I love me some weed, right? Even if you're a weed smoker, and you have this negative interaction with the cops, it creates this horrible taste in your mouth, right? Because you've just been, like you said, dehumanized. Even if they don't find anything, they pull you over and they search your car, they go through all your shit. You're like, fuck these motherfuckers, right? I'm not fucking hurting anybody. Why are they fucking with me? And that's a complete legitimate feeling, right? And it happens way too much in America, and it happens way too much to black men in America, right? And that is a fundamental, that was the focus of my thesis, and a fundamental breaking point. And if you want to fix the Grand Canyon, the chasm between black America and law enforcement, is you stop fucking with people and searching their car over fucking recreational drugs, right? And your only function, police, see, right now, people don't realize the two main functions of police in America are revenuing. They're basically tax agents. It's a regressive tax. It is a regressive, and I'm not even talking about asset forfeiture and shit, which is the big catalyst for the drug war, but I'm talking about traffic tickets, right? I'm talking about writing, in the 90s and 2000s, they were writing tickets for truancy and making parents pay it, writing tickets for behavior in class. I had to tell the chief of police for the school district where I was a judge, I'm just dismissing these tickets. I was very proactive. And I had a mayor that backed me up. So he didn't care about the dip in revenue, but I didn't know, because as a presiding judge, you're the boss, not just of the court. You're a boss of like the administration of justice. And I didn't realize and I was very young as a lawyer when I became the presiding judge of the city. You see that the revenue generated by the courts helps the city balance the budget. And that's fucking crazy, because it's a regressive tax. Because poor people get pulled over more. Black people get pulled over more. Latino people get pulled over more. And you could say, well, they're, breaking traffic laws more. No. And poor people pay more, right? They miss their court dates. They do all this. And it's insane. Cities should not, or counties, local entities should not be allowed to keep any revenue from citation enforcement. None. It should all go to something else. So you take away the motivation to write these tickets. That's why you have ticket quotas, which you absolutely do. So you have the revenuing aspect of law enforcement over here. And then you have, on the other side, again, it's prohibition, which also leads to revenuing. Drug enforcement, where really what cops should be worried about, DWIs. DWIs are so dangerous. They threaten so many lives in this country. That should be the primary focus of traffic enforcement, right? That and reckless driving in a manner, or criminality, right? There's a famous video from about a year ago where a cop just sits there. Guys are hanging out of a car in Philadelphia with, they got fully automatic weapons hanging out there, and the cop just lets them go, right? Which is insane to me. That should be the focus. But the real focus, we had this famous case where we had thousands of cases like sexual assaults with known suspects, robberies in Houston, where HPD just said, oh, we don't have the manpower, and didn't investigate. It's insane to me, right? That's your whole job. And it's not. It's third on the list, right? You have writing traffic tickets to make money, the war on drugs, and then you get to actually fighting violent crime. And fighting violent crime should be that's it. That's what they should do. Victim crime. And then with the cameras, right? We need cameras on everybody all the time, unless you're, undercover for some reason. And, like these warrant services where you have horrible outcomes. You have everything. You can buy a body camera from Amazon to hang around your neck right now for like $60. There's no fucking reason why cops shouldn't have a camera on all the time. And, the cops don't want to hear that shit. But the truth is, cameras protect good people from bad cops and good cops from bad people. And it's accountability. But it's not, doesn't do any good if there's no fucking transparency, right? And it all needs to be accessible and released. And it's a problem. But if you had accountable police whose only function was victim crime, and I'm not talking just violent crime, right? Try calling, if you call 911 right now in Houston, it'll say on the recording that you got to go through before you can talk to someone. Somebody could be trying to kill you, and you got to go through this fucking recording, right? if you are calling to report theft or vandalism in an amount less than $5,000, call. And then they give you the non-emergency contact. That's just fucking crazy. Yeah. Well, don't call it just because it's against the law to call them.
Well, it's a prompt. They give me a prompt first.
Yeah,
right?
but see, you're not allowed to call 911. It's a crime. I can't encourage a crime. Okay. But no, I'm telling you, I called it recently. Right. I live here in the city. I'm not one of those white dudes who lives in a gated community in suburbia. I live in the heart of my city that I love.
In a gated community.
No, I don't. I live on a fucking corner.
There ain't nothing wrong with living in a gated community.
No, there's nothing wrong with it, but I live in Houston, right?
Right.
And, it's fucking...
In Houston.
$5,000 can destroy someone's life, right? A working person. And your police don't even want to show up to take a report, let alone investigate or do anything. That's fucking crazy to me. That's your job. In the 90s, we fought fucking crime. Like if we knew somebody was hitting a community, burglarizing a bunch, we would sit out there looking for that motherfucker. We would try to fight fucking crime. That's what we did. And you don't feel anymore. You feel like it's an irritation when you engage with law enforcement. They got to do a report. And it's all about ethos. And, of course, they blame, well, if America hates us, we're not going to do any work. Fuck you. You took an oath, right? So I don't suffer from the delusion that policing is good. I think you have three types of cops. I think it's the family business, your dad or your mom. More likely your dad did it, so you do it. It's, people that truly believe in public service, and I think that's one big chunk. And then you have bullies, whether they were bullied as a child and they want to be a bully, or they're just always a fucking bully, and that's a huge chunk as well.
And then you have racist.
Well, I think that falls in the bullies.
That falls with the bullies.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you're inherently, but I do think that there are good law enforcers, but I think that by this, the tremendous amount of demonization, fair and unfair, you're giving people a way to rationalize not doing their job. And we're just not doing it in America. We have to deconstruct law enforcement and reprioritize it into where when they show up, they're showing up to figure out who committed the crime to a law-abiding citizen. It's like schools. Teachers, they can't get the bad kids disciplined. So the good kids just suffer quietly until they join Team Bad Kid. And it's insane.
Do you believe that law enforcement is the primary purpose of law enforcement is to protect the innocent or to maintain power?
I think it's supposed to be to protect the innocent. That's what I have always, when I was a policeman for about 6.5 years, that is what I believe the job to be.
Well, that's what it's supposed to be.
Right. I think that it is about generating revenue for municipalities and local entities. And I think it is about control, right, through prohibition. I think those are 1 and 2. And I think we've become, even since the 90s, it has become horribly reactive instead of proactive. So somebody gets killed, they're going to show up and they're going to try to, our clearance rate for murder is about half right now in Houston.
Damn, it's that low?
Yeah, it's crazy with cameras everywhere, ability to track everybody. That's why, we have robberies all the time, right? When Altuve's house got broken into, they went out and got all the robberies, burglaries. When Altuve's house and his jewelry got stolen, they went out and collected, doorbell cameras and security cameras, and man, they found them, right? But when average Joe Blow gets burglarized, nobody does shit.
There lies the problem.
And that's the problem. So if you get social media attention, we had a guy in my neighborhood that kept attacking women, and he attacked a woman on my block. I wasn't home. A transient, vagrant guy, very aggressive, very violent, and nobody cared. Once the media got involved and shone a bright light on it and got on the news, and all of a sudden he gets arrested. Turned out he had crazy history, open warrants, on bond for, just PR bond after PR bond. But law enforcement didn't care until somebody at the top said, fuck, there's a news story. Y'all need to get on this shit. No, it absolutely is about revenue and control, but it shouldn't be. It should be about fighting victim crime, right? And that's where we're fundamentally broken. And it's far worse for black men because law-abiding black men. I don't give a shit about victim criminals, right? I don't care, white, black, Asian, fuck all of them, right? When I was a criminal defense attorney, I would zealously represent them. But if you are someone that victimizes others, right, I have no empathy for you. I don't care what color you are. Fuck you, right? But the problem is law enforcement, just like me, right now we have crime tourism. Like it used to be, people used to demonize immigrants in this country, especially illegal immigrants. They would demonize them, and they were overwhelmingly more law-abiding than citizens, right? Irrespective of race. Because they knew if they came to this country and got in trouble, they'd get fucking deported, right? So they're much more conscious of it. In the last decade, it's got to the point, especially during the Biden administration, we had people committing crime tourism, literally coming from developing nations to America, especially Central and South America, to commit crime and then go back. It's fucking crazy. We have been in larger cities, there has been this wholesale abandonment, right? And who suffers the most? Black Americans. That is literally, people want to focus on how, black males tend to commit an outsized amount of violent crime. But no one wants to talk about that black people, men and women, suffer, are victimized by an outsized amount of violent crime.
Why can't America get it under its thick skull that if black people suffer, by black people being in this country and suffering as Americans, if black people suffer, America suffers. If black people are doing bad, it's a reflection on America doing bad. Why? It's like,
well,
if we're Americans, because we, instead of looking at black, let's look at Americans. Mm-hmm. If there's a large group of Americans doing bad, if a large group of Americans are hurting or being harmed, it would behoove America to address the issue instead of trying to dress the issue down. Why is it so hard for them to see that? It's like the only time that we come together is when there's a crisis or some type of entertainment. If we're at a game, you know how it go. You be at the Astros, we be high-fiving, we've been in the suites together, high-fiving, woo-woo, the minute you leave the stadium, get in the car, same thing you go to a concert. Everybody's, you're there, you're enjoying your favorite singer, and, there's all types of people there, and everybody's getting along. As soon as you damn get in the car, right back. It's like we're programmed.
We live in a city that is beset with violence. Houston has a real problem with violent crime. We absolutely do. We can pretend it doesn't exist, but that would be stupid. We absolutely have a real problem with crime in this city, and it is not ignorant for people to take proactive steps to keep them safe. I would disagree with the narrative that we all just divorce ourselves from everybody else after, because, I spend a lot of time with a lot of people, and it's a rather a diverse group of people. But I do think that, yes, we live in a country where people isolate themselves and they look for some sort of homogeneity. We live in a world where that happens. And the people that are more familiar, for whatever reason, whether it be a mutable characteristic or a job or something else, tend to want to be around those people. And to pretend different is just not the truth. I would argue that we all have a far more vibrant life when we have an exposure to a variety of different types of people, whether it be based on race, ethnicity, education, interest, whatever. I think you learn more from other people. I don't think, however, we should be shaming, like if a woman clutches her purse or doesn't want to walk down an alley, it's because she feels unsafe, right?
Well, that's a different situation. I'm talking about in terms of race. I'm talking about like we're a diverse group of people.
You don't fuck with white people?
When we're we're a diverse group of people when we're in, the stadiums, when we're at arenas or whatever, or when there's a crisis. For example, when we had the flood, man, it didn't matter what the person color was. You saw somebody that was stranded or whatever. You helped them to get on the boat and you took them to safety. That's what we do. We come together when there's a time of crisis.
Well, I mean, let's be fair. During the floods, we also had an incredible number of people that exploited that situation to loot houses and steal stuff.
Well, I don't think it was incredible. Come on now.
I mean,
there was some uncivilized mutts roaming around that took advantage, and
certainly.
And I'm glad that our politicians, our lawmakers, passed a law to make them pay double, when they try to take advantage of situations like that. That was a great move. That was a great move.
Well, you had the price gougers, so you had like the corporatist fucking fleecing of people, but then you also had the actual like everyday criminals that were taking advantage.
Yeah.
But I mean, we do have. I mean, people don't realize outside of Houston that Houston is the most diverse large city in America, overwhelmingly so. Right. We have a food scene in this country, or in this city, that is
the best. Ain't nobody. There's no comparison.
Right. Well, I mean, there might be some better restaurants in New York. I think New York's got a great food scene.
I'm speaking collectively.
But I think when you factor in for accessibility, affordability, and by accessibility, like you got to be a rich fucker to get into a lot of restaurants in New York, and it's just kind of obscene and it's gatekeeping, exclusionary. We don't have that in Houston, and we have a bunch of cheap food. So I don't think I don't personally think that many Houstonians live these lives that are homogenous, right? I think it's possible, and I think the very rich do, and I think in suburbia it's more possible. But I think we are very diverse here, and that's why I'd like to see this kind of recalibrating of law enforcement resources and everything to try to make it more safe here, because I do think that when you look at the cultural diversity and the opportunities, right? We're not a classist society like most big cities. Like Dallas, very classist, right? Boston, incredibly. Like the whole concept of the Brahmin in Boston and obviously New York. We don't have that here. Like anyone can make a good living in the city, right? Anyone can work nights like I did. There's plenty of people I know that work at the chemical plants and went to school during the day. There's all this money to be made in Houston. We just need to make this city safer. So I would disagree. I don't think that most people aren't diverse in their friend group.
Does the new law, that's the weed law that was passed to ban, what is it? How do you say it? TH?
Yes, it bans. So
what's it called? TH?
Well,
what?
you got all the THC, but you've got all these different variants. So THC itself was already still illegal, right? And people don't realize that the gummies and the oils and the pens, it's still a fucking felony, right? It was only the flower that was a misdemeanor. That's still, but largely not prosecuted, especially here in Houston, Austin, bigger cities. But the way they worked around it was a variety of, you have THCP, THCA, THCD, but Delta 9 and Delta 8 hemp variants, right? Where they would get around the limitations placed on the amount of THC by, putting it in drinks and putting it in gummies and other stuff. But our lieutenant governor, hopefully our governor will veto it, but our lieutenant governor ramrodded this bill both through the Texas Senate and the Texas House that made it all illegal, made everything illegal. So all these THC, Delta 8, Delta 9 shops, all the hemp businesses, unless Abbott vetoes it, they're all going to be a crime, both misdemeanor and felony, depending on the weight and trafficking and stuff. And it's going to be horrible, right? The whole issues that I discuss about cops hassling people, it's now going to be greatly exacerbated across this state. It's just a horrible idea. But yeah, no, if Abbott signs it, and there's some hope, apparently DeSantis refused to sign and vetoed a similar bill in Florida. And this is where the Republicans always lose me, right? Like, because I am very pro public safety. I am very pro meritocracy and things that I want to talk about on social media. I'm mainly just on Instagram. I get accused of being a Republican a lot. But Republicans fucking lose me. One, they're really just facilitating corporate greed, right? Like this new bigger, better is just for the post-monetary. But also this bullshit theocracy, right? So like here on the state level, our lieutenant governor, who's a fucking asshole, Dan Patrick, and that's not even his real name. Dan Patrick is just his talk radio personality from the 80s.
Didn't that guy used to be on TV in Houston?
He was on talk radio. He bought a talk radio station, and it was the first to bring Rush Limbaugh to Houston.
Was a sports guy.
He might have. I think he might have the sports talk before he did, but that was like the early 80s. But he developed his persona, and then he just became his life. And, I did talk radio for years. Me and Zero did talk radio. And, I've seen it. I've seen this kind of dichotomy between the way people present themselves on the radio versus the lives they lead. And it's repugnant. Like, I've always decided I'll just be authentic. People don't like me, I don't give a fuck. That's me. People like me, great. But we have this weed law that is just, if it goes into effect, it's going to destroy a bunch of businesses, and it's gonna raise the amount of negative interactions that we were talking about earlier between law enforcers and regular people. And it's just fucking awful. And the Republicans, they say they act like they're doing it to protect the kids from going to the weed shop. There's already laws against selling it to kids, right? The truth is you have the alcohol lobby, because if you look at states like Colorado, full legalization, California, alcohol sales just plummet, right? Because at the end of the day, weed is so much better for you. Like, if you got to do something to take the edge off, weed's the best health outcome-wise.
Well, a lot of people are also using it for pain.
Right. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. Not just pain. Cancer patients for appetite, right? And nausea associated with it. They can't take other pain medication. People with severe PTSD. I think there's a lot of people faking PTSD, and there's a lot of fake disabilities out there. But PTSD is a real thing. And there are people that have suffered horrible outcomes, whether they've been to war or been the victims of a horrible crime or something else, that don't want to be on psychotropic and other types of just crazy mood stabilizing drugs that can hit some weed and they're functioning in society. And we both know, I assume we both know, we know people that smoke too much and it robs them of their drive and motivation. But that's the exception, not the rule. Weed's not a poison. Like, I consume THC. I drink it, maybe 2-3 times a week, right? End of the day, or, if I'm going out, because I'm not drinking alcohol. I started drinking alcohol when I was 11 years old. I think I smoked weed first when I was 13.
11?
11, I was a bad kid.
Did you get to a point to where you became a drunk?
No. Well, here's my thing. I was a binge drinker. So I always felt this need, especially because, I had my first kid young, that, man.
How young?
I had Madeline when I was 22. Not super young, but young.
Man, I thought you was 15 or something.
No, okay. Thank goodness. But so I was always motivated because I wanted my kids to have stuff I didn't have growing up, and I was always motivated to work hard. My thing with drinking is I could go months without drinking. But if I had one drink, I was going to have 15, right? And I could drink. And, I was not someone, I'm not a bully. Like, I don't get drunk and get in fights. My drinking arc would be cutting up, not worrying about shit, getting late night food, going to sleep. That was it. Like, I would never got in shit as a drunk. I'd never drank. I obviously saw some horrible wrecks from drunk driving as a police officer. But it was just not something I ever did, right? So it was never an issue. But I got to the point where I just would feel miserable, right around 50. So I just stopped drinking. And I had a half a martini last week. Like every 4, 5, 6 months, I might have half a drink or something with somebody if I have a client that wants me to have a drink with them. But it's a poison. Alcohol is a poison. It's horrible for you. Well, I feel so much better. I was tipping in at 335, right? I stopped drinking. That's the only thing I changed. You see, I mean,
Yeah.
I eat.
Hold on, you lost all that weight just not drinking? What?
No, I started working out, stopped drinking. You know, I usually drink like once a week, and I would I'd drink way too much, and I'd make some horrible food decisions after the fact. Then I felt like shit for 2 or 3 days. Stopped it. I mean, I started, you know, I got my knees all messed up now. I need to get a knee surgery, but I started boxing a lot and working out a lot because I felt better. Weed doesn't do none of that shit, right? Weed is not a poison, right? I get these Cheech and Chong drinks, no calories in them even. I order them in bulk, right? Like they treat me like a commercial guy. You go in my fucking garage filled with them. And is it as fun as drinking a cold beer or, you know, some Blands or some really good bourbon? No, right? And it's not, I don't enjoy it as much. Like when I drink alcohol, especially when I'm gambling or something, you know, I'm down to like 3 jobs, but I was working 6, 7 jobs most of my life, right? I had all kind of income streams. I wanted my kids to have all the things, right? And I would drink, whether I was at a bar or a casino, and I would just think about whatever I was doing, just having a good time, right? And that's what I liked about drinking. And it's not the same. We makes you tired, you go to sleep, but it's so much better for you, right? And you got some bars in town that are sort of like Rudyard's, kind of near my house. They serve these weed shots. You can go to Eighth Wonder. You can go to all these places, a handful of places selling weed drinks. All of it much better for you. All of it.
And they're outlawing that now?
They're outlawing all that shit. And if the governor signs it, it'll become illegal in September. Now, the hope is that Abbott will recognize that it's a horrible idea. You know, but the thing is, you know, the way the Republicans justify it, they say, oh, we're protecting kids, we're doing this. This is the alcohol lobby, and this is big pharma, because it's very easy. Like I buy weed from Cheech and Chong's company. I buy those drinks. But you can go grow. When I was in high school, I had 3 weed plants in the field back in the, you know, I mean, we were growing our own in pots, you know, we're doing it. And, you know, people can self-medicate so they're not dependent on these days. And we have so many people in America taking a pill every day just to fucking get by. And then they find out that they, you know, use a little weed and they don't have to take that shit. And it's horrible. You know, we got kids on Adderall, like 9, 10 years old. We got kids on Wellbutrin and Xanax. I mean, and if you look at that shit, it's killing America. And Big Pharma is making a fortune on it. And with weed, they're not.
You know, the same people that's trying to ban this, it's the same people that's using weed too. They smoking.
Well, see, that's another big thing about the war on drugs and what I hate about it, right? Like, how can you go, like George W. Bush, famously, he liked the cocaine, right? So as this super rich child of incredible privilege, right? I don't believe in this myth of holistic white privilege. There are plenty of white people, more white people in aggregate poverty in America, plenty of white people that have shit lives from stem to stern, right? But when your dad's the fucking, you know, the head of the CIA and a U.S. congressman, I mean, fucking power privilege, right? That's what I believe. The real privilege in America is wealth and access to power. So you got this fucking kid, grows up partying. And I mean partying, right? Still ends up being president. Why? Because it's policed different. Like when I had been a policeman, then went to Harvard, right? When I got there, I remember walking through Harvard Square and some people just standing there smoking weed. And weed was still illegal in Boston. Nobody fucking with them. Nobody cares. Right. You go to Jamaica Plain and you stand on the street corner smoking weed, you're getting fucking arrested. This is, 2000. You're getting fucking locked up. And that's the problem. That's the disparity is you can use, if you're some rich kid, you're doing blow in the bathroom at some fancy restaurant or at the country club or shit, ain't nobody fucking with you. In my neighborhood growing up, cops fucked with us all the fucking time. Constantly. And, you're constantly engaging with them. And the only time you should be engaging with them is when you're committing crimes. If you're stealing shit or fucking with somebody or beating somebody up. And so you have people, that was my big motivation with the drug war, is I save people's lives. Like I had a woman, hit me on Instagram. Of course, I forget. I've represented, probably 10,000 more people over the years. And she was a successful geologist now. for a major oil company. But she had a shitty case, and the whole thing was shit, and it would have completely derailed her life, right? Over bullshit, drug bullshit, because she happened to be in the car with someone that had just a misdemeanor amount of drugs, just whatever, or a state jail felony. But back in the 2000s, a lot of these smaller suburban police departments, Pearland, Fresno, they'd file the shit on every kid in the fucking car if no kid would own up to it. I mean, we have a rapper that went to jail back in the day, or prison, because somebody else wouldn't own up to drank in the car. It's what happens. And, went on about how, because some of the other people pled, but she was my client, I got it dismissed, and just wrote me this long missive about how it saved her life and how well she's doing now. And we don't think about those downstream consequences that this drug war has on kids, on young adults who all of a sudden just don't have opportunity now, right? And, and it's long term. And it's not, and you get in this net, like how many people do we have in Texas or in America that got a coke case or a heroin case or a speed case or whatever when they were, or acid, whatever, when they're 19, 20, 21 years old. And then 10 years later, they're hunting and they get arrested, or they're in a car where there's a gun and they get a felon in possession of a gun case when they're not out there criming, they just, personal protection or whatever. We remove people from opportunities in our society, and the people that suffer worst, there's absolutely no doubt about that, are law-abiding black men. And by law-abiding, I mean black men not committing victim crime, right? Who somehow get caught up in the net of the system for something like cocaine or something, just simple possession. And then they keep getting fucked with by the system. And what does that do? I think it leads people to actual crime. I think we put people in prison for drugs. It's crazy.
Let's switch for a minute. You've been following the Carmelo Anthony Austin Metcalf case, right?
Yes, sir.
So you know that Carmelo is being charged as an adult, and he if convicted, he faces life with parole after 40 years.
So it was a big Facebook story this week. I saw that posted several times. Carmelo's been charged as an adult. Well, then you have the people on one side that are horrified, and then you have the people on the other side that are saying, yeah, he should be getting the death penalty. The truth is, it's a non-story. You reach your age of criminal majority in Texas at 17. Everyone does. He was always charged as an adult. You're not charged as a juvenile unless you're 16 or under. Now, there are some juveniles in some type of cases where you can get certified and prosecuted as an adult when you're still a juvenile.
17,
but he was 17-year-olds are always charged as an adult. So he was always charged as an adult. It's a story by those outside of Texas who don't understand, or those inside Texas who aren't familiar with the law. At 17, you're always, every case you get, whether it's a DWI or a murder, the whole gauntlet, you're always charged as an adult because you are an adult at 17 under the eyes of the law for most purposes other than like a sexual performance. There's a couple of weird categories. So he was always an adult when he committed the murder.
How come he hasn't been indicted yet?
Well, it's a process, and you have months to do it, because he's out on bond. They can delay it even longer.
Why are they delaying it?
It's pretty common. I mean, it's not uncommon to take a few months or even longer. Like I've had clients didn't get indicted for a year. There is a catalyst if you're in custody. A good lawyer will file a writ of habeas corpus and get you a PR bond if you're in custody, just wallowing away. But no, they got the time. I mean, they're crossing their T's and dotting their I's, I'm sure. But he will you can indict a ham sandwich. And people have a mistaken belief that the grand jury process in Texas is adversarial. It is not. It's just the prosecutor, and they can get whoever they want indicted. He is absolutely going to get indicted. And I do think he'll at the end of the day, get convicted. I do not think he's going to get life. So 17, you're automatically an adult.
Why should he be convicted?
Well, he committed murder.
I mean, there's a lot of people that commit murder that don't get convicted.
Well, when there is a defense to prosecution, But most murder cases that are taken to trial, almost always, it's very rare for a murder case to not result in a conviction. But in this case, what bothers me the most about the Anthony Metcalf scenario is that most of the people who have the strongest feelings about it, if you swap the races, their position would also swap. Whereas my position would always be the same, right? I don't care at all if Anthony was white and Metcalf was black. I would think it was murder. Just it has no bearing.
Explain why you believe it was murder.
Okay. Well, so in Texas, you only have the right to use deadly force in self-defense to match a threat of deadly force, or if you have a legitimate fear of death, like this person's going to kill you. And it's you have to be able to articulate it. And if you look at just the words said by Anthony after the fact and the witnesses, right? There's people that are pretending to be witnesses and all this. But if you look at everything that's been generated and released, it seems that Anthony was under the impression that he could respond to physical force with deadly force, and that'd be a valid use of a valid act of self-defense. It is absolutely not under Texas law. Even if someone were to punch you, you can't just pull out a knife and stab them in the chest, right? You could shove them off, you can hit them back, but you can't pull out a deadly weapon and use it. It's not allowed under Texas law. But Anthony, and I know social media got all worked up and said, all this racist stuff and the two brothers attacked him and all that. And I think that's really been the worst thing, is all this horrible stuff that's been said about Hunter Metcalf that's completely contrived, right? But even looking at Anthony's position, which I'm sure will evolve, but his position initially, everybody's position was that Austin shoved him. Okay, you don't get to kill someone for shoving you. Period. There is no. Apparently it looks like Carmelo's had some emotional stuff going on, and had already got an issue at school, and it does appear that he was looking for conflict, right? But
I don't think he was looking for a conflict. I think he
based on what?
I think he was preparing him. He was prepared for a conflict. It's a difference.
Yeah, see, I think your position on that is only because Carmelo's black.
No,
and that
no,
if Austin was the black one, you'd be screaming for Carmelo's head.
No, my position is the way it is because I understand the double standards that exist in this country. Remember,
okay,
we had a situation.
What's the double standard?
But we had a situation here where, remember the situation that happened in, I think it was Pasadena, where the white neighbors saw his neighbor's house being broken into, and he called 911 and said, "Hey, these guys are breaking into my neighbor's house, and I got a gun."
Joe, what was his last name?
I forgot.
Yeah.
But I got
Joe Horn.
I give Joe Horn. That's him. Joe Horn got on the horn and called 911 and said, "Yo, they breaking in my neighbor's house." And they said, "Okay, sir, you don't need to follow them." No, I'm going to follow them. I'm going to stop them. And he went out there.
And executed.
He went out there and shot those men who were running away from the house. And the jury, the Klan jury, refused to indict.
Well,
they didn't even get to an indictment. They just said, "You know what? Way to go, Joe."
Well,
Come on, man. It's the double standards. That's the reason why I ride for Carmelo the way I do. Because of the double standards. I know for a fact, let's talk about flipping the races. If you flip the race and Carmelo is white and Austin is black and Carmelo ends up dead, the white guy ends up killing the black guy, then everybody, many of the same people who riding for Austin right now would be saying, "Well, he's standing his ground. He was standing his ground. The guy's a bully." Remember they're saying there was rumors that Austin and his brother were bullies. They were bullying Carmelo.
Those were contrived.
Remember, we don't like bullies in America.
Okay, again, all these horrible stories being attributed to the Metcalf brothers, I've all unraveled, and they were all contrived by people. I would absolutely agree with you when you say that there would be a lot of people trying to justify, a lot of people, white people, would be trying to justify it if you race swapped it. The same people crying it was murder. I would not, okay? And I absolutely believe that your position would be completely different if it was race swapped, and you would be calling for Carmelo's head if Carmelo was white and he killed a white kid.
I absolutely.
You're not going to convince me.
Well, and you're not going to convince me that if the races were swapped, that you would just have the same position.
Okay,
you see?
But I would.
Because I don't believe that.
My position is based purely on my understanding of Texas law and reading all of the available witness accounts, police reports, and everything. You don't get to use a deadly weapon to kill someone that shoved you. And it doesn't even look like it was much of a shove, right? And it's absurd to me, and it is absolutely race bigotry that is driving everyone. I'd say 99.9% of the people defending Carmelo. And
how much percentage that's defending Austin?
Well, Austin's dead. There's no defending him.
They are defending
right?
him. You can defend the dead.
Well, Austin's the victim. And I think that there are plenty of people that, like you said, that would switch their position if the races were switched. But all of those people are awful people, right? Whether you would switch it because you're black and you support black people no matter what they do, or you're white and you support white people no matter what they do. That's awful.
I don't rock like that. I don't support black people no matter what they do.
Okay.
I know that we have uncivilized mutts in our race too. So I don't support black people no matter what they do. I call out black people on a daily basis on my platform, unlike some people who, when they see police officers killing black folks or anybody killing black folks, they always are on the side of the person who did the killing. No matter what,
I don't disagree. Even there are people that take cop sides no matter what.
No matter what, there are people that with all of the murders over the last 10 years who have never one time said that the police was wrong. Not one time. So my position is based on the double standards and the bias, bro. That's what it is.
But that has nothing to do with the immediate situation of Carmelo murdering a kid.
No, hold on. Let me clarify that.
Okay.
It's not just based on the. My passion is based on the double standards. My passion is based on the double standards that exist in this country. Because I know, just like with the Caitlin Clark situation, with everybody, not everybody, but these people who make videos on a daily basis attacking Angel Reese, they're only doing it because Angel Reese is a black girl. They're only doing it.
I don't think
that's fair. If Angel Reese was white, they would not spend every waking moment criticizing her.
So I'm an LSU guy. Like, I finished at U of H, but I did my first 5 semesters of college.
And based on that alone, you need to be on Angel's side.
No, hold on.
Whose side you on?
Well, I'm a fan of Angels, right, in college. I don't care about Caitlin, right? She went to Iowa and she plays for Indiana. Neither of those matter to me. But I will say that Caitlin is obviously a prodigy. Like, it's insane how good she is at women's basketball. And she generates, like, I saw a stat from this week that they played in Atlanta and they sold more tickets for that one game than all of the tickets sold for all the aggregate games for the season to date, right? She's selling tickets. Angel is about to, if she keeps pace, she will break the record for the lowest shooting percentage in the WNBA.
And also, if she keeps pace, she will break the record for the highest, the most amount of double doubles and rebounds in the WNBA.
No. She is a very, if you want to, it's easier for me to look at it if you know, to read the analogy. A very, Bill Laimbeer, who was a much underrated key component of the Pistons in the late 80s when they won their 2 championships, right? Just a big guy that rebounded a lot and was willing to fight.
The hell out of
he was willing to fucking throw down. And Angel Reese plays a very Bill Laimbeer style game. I think she's important. I think it sounds like she does seem a bit ate up with it seems like she is bothered by the outsized amount of attention that Caitlin Clark gets. And there is no doubt it would be dishonest to say that a part of that isn't racially driven, like white people looking at the next great white hope or whatever in a sport.
Most of it is racially driven.
She's fucking great, though.
No, she's good. She ain't great.
She's not
she
good.
Ain't great.
She has broken so many records.
She ain't great. She ain't great.
She is.
She's good.
Her and Cheryl Swoops.
Angel Wilson is great.
Look,
That's greatness.
I mean, I
That's
think
proven greatness.
I think at the end of the day,
you got to win championships, bro. You got to win championships to be great.
Hey, look,
you can't just be great just because you came out.
LSU was not supposed to win that game when they won the national championship and one of the most watched sporting events of that year, and it was because of Angel and her teammates really just shut everyone down but Caitlin, and they won, and it was a great fucking game. I think that Angel Reese makes a lot of statements driven by insecurity that I wish she would just drop. I wish she would work harder on her shot because she's got a bad shot. But I do think that she could be a great one. I do think that the media wants to hype up this black versus white bullshit. I think that's like me and Quanell's show, Fox Face Off. Man, they would love it if we just said a bunch of racist shit to each other.
And by the way, that's one of the best shows out there.
I appreciate it.
Congratulations on that show. That's a good show.
Well, so Quanell and I, very, very divergent, right? Obviously Nation of Islam, an activist. I'm an ex-cop and a lawyer. And man, there are times when we get into it, we'll fucking scream and yell at each other. But when we're over, it's over. We are, we don't act like it. We're actually very good friends, and it's fun to do. But clearly Fox would rather us just scream racist shit at each other because the ratings would be great. I mean, ratings are good, but they'd would be more viral. But neither of us.
That's not y'all.
Yeah, that's not all.
That's not you. That's not him.
And that's what. Linear TV is dying. Everyone wants that virality, right? And it's always driven by divide and hate. And as a society, we're much easier to control if we hate each other.
Right.
If the corporatists, the post-monetary, the people making all the post-monetary who just got this huge break on the estate tax, the people making all this fucking money that don't have to work for it, they know that us peons are easier to control if we all hate each other, right? And there's a big audience for it. They realize that if it's a black versus white hate game, it gets the WNBA more attention. Now, if Angel and Caitlin were doing this on the sly, it'd be brilliant. Because more people, we're sitting here talking about the WNBA. Nobody was talking about the WNBA for years. And I'll be honest, right? As someone that just dropped an obscene amount of money for floor seats for the Rockets next year, I love basketball. I don't love women's basketball a lot because it's just not as exciting. But
the Caitlin Clark fans don't love it like that either.
Well, I would say that, I think America is paying more attention now, right? She is selling tickets. I think that her and Angel's Discord sells tickets. It gets people. We're talking about it on a not sports podcast right here. I do think there's a racial element to it. To pretend different would be absurd. But I do think Caitlin is that good. I think Caitlin is incredible. I think that she will, at the end of her career, be the Michael Jordan equivalent of the WNBA. Michael Jordan, and I mean, you could disagree, is the all-time greatest. No one ever.
She ain't gonna be Michael. She ain't gonna be the Michael Jordan of the WNBA.
But I think that
she might be the Larry Bird of the WNBA.
See, I don't know. Where would you put Bird on the all-time top 10? Our all-time is, I don't even know if you'd have him top 10.
Oh, no.
Where would you rank him?
That motherfucker in the top 10.
Yeah. He's number one shit talker of all time.
Nah. He in the top 10 because when you think about top 10, you can't just think about the skill set. You have to think about how he made the players around him better.
Yeah.
And you have to think about how good he was in the clutch. You see, that motherfucker, he's up there like. Shit, Bird might be top 3, man.
So my top, my personal favorite player of all time, is, I mean, both I think the best and my favorite is Jordan. But after Jordan, it's Iverson, right? But I think I would put Bird definitely in the top 10. And I say that growing up hating him, right? I don't know how. I graduated high school in 90. So 86, Sampson and Olajuwon versus the Celtics. Danny Ainge punching Ralph Sampson. I fucking hated the Celtics, right? And Bird along with them. But because I fucking rock with Houston. But, I mean, he is great. I think that Steph is a better three-point shooter. I think that Bird, like you said, was a better leader. And I would probably put Bird and Steph both of them around 6 or 7. Right?
You know what? I wouldn't be mad at that.
Yeah.
You know, like he could. I don't know. I think Bird is a top 5 pick for me.
Yeah.
Only because, like I say, I like the competitiveness of Bird. Like,
right.
You got to foul that motherfucker.
Right. Oh,
like,
no.
Bird is the type of dude, I would have fouled his ass. I would have been like, you not finna embarrass me like that, dude. Like, they're going to kick me out of the game, bro, because I'm going to have to hit him in his side or something to stop his ass from doing all of this miraculous stuff that he would do to get a bucket.
Well, it was a much more violent game back then. I mean, we have all these rules that were built around facilitating LeBron. Yeah. But when you talk about the drive, that's my thing with the NBA. Well, with the pedestaling of LeBron as the greatest of all time, I disagree.
No,
I would
LeBron is not the greatest.
My top 3 are Jordan, Kareem, Kobe. That's my top 3.
Your top 3 is Jordan, Kareem, Kobe.
And I would say Shaq has to come number 4, but only because he was. I would go Shaq then Olajuwon. But Olajuwon and Shaq both benefited from being so large, right? Like, I don't know. Like, Olajuwon had a much better skill set than Shaquille, right? But people forget how Shaquille, I would not put LeBron in the top 5. People forget how Shaquille just changed the game, right? But when you look at Kobe, when Kobe lost, that shit pissed Kobe off. You know, when you look at Kareem's first game in the league, he punched somebody in the face because they kept fucking with him, right? Kareem gave a fuck. People sleep on Kareem because it is arguable that he is the greatest of all time. Like, Bill Russell, a different time, whatever. But
I think I can name at least 2 centers I think is better than Kareem.
Really?
And that's starting out. I think Olajuwon is the greatest center ever.
I think he's the most skilled center ever.
I think first Olajuwon. But let me see, my top 3, basketball. Let's see, I know my boy Tiki go trip out on this. Okay, my top 3, I would say, again, and this is my criteria. Skill set, leadership, clutch. That clutch is the moment when it counts the most. Clutch. Right. And I think, for me, that's Jordan. That's Kobe. That's, Jordan, Kobe. Damn, that would take Olajuwon out of my top 3 because, as good as he was, when it came to that right there, skill set, leadership, clutch, all 3 of those things working at the same time when we needed it the most, I'm saying consistently throughout his career. 1, 2, 3. Shit, I would have to say Magic Johnson, man.
Yeah, see, and then you start thinking about it. Well, how is Tim Duncan not in the conversation, right? How are they? I mean, it's very hard to do. Like, for me, that's why, I think Jordan is a GOAT, and then I forget. And then Iverson was always my favorite person to watch, right? Just the way, like, it meant something. Like, that's the thing. That's my problem with LeBron.
Allen Iverson was perhaps the most fearless basketball player to ever lace up a pair of sneakers.
Especially at his height as compared to, he didn't give a
I'm saying fearless, he go into that hole. If you go back and look at Allen Iverson, not highlights, but just watch him play, he probably, 50% of the time that he went to the hole, he ended up on the floor.
Oh yeah, he didn't give a fuck.
Yeah,
He put his
go
whole.
up
That's the whole
in
thing.
there, like-
He put his whole body into it. Whereas Jordan was just a specimen. Like you hear these stories of him playing 36 holes of golf, drinking all day, and then going and dropping 40, 50 points. Jordan was just Black Jesus. Like he was a different thing. When you talk to people that know him personally, I have some famous athlete friends. There is just a passion that he was just built different, right? But Kobe put in the work, right? Like Kobe was trying to be Jordan too by putting in the work. You talk about somebody that, like, from a lawyer's perspective, and I've read everything on it. I was very interested in that case. You talk about somebody that was probably only charged because he was a black guy. And had he been convicted in rural Colorado of sexual assault, despite some very, very important facts that should have given law enforcement pause, in my opinion, and it was a black cloud over Kobe's career. And the way he snitched on Shaq in the when he was being interviewed bothered me. But despite that, I think he could have gone to prison and we would have been robbed of it unfairly. I think I personally believe Kobe was absolutely innocent. Kobe worked so much harder than everyone else. Like I think LeBron is a more naturally gifted athlete than Kobe. And I think LeBron is probably a better citizen than Jordan, like outside the court. But I think Kobe worked so hard. Like, I don't even like the fucking Lakers, right? I'm a Rockets fan. But I got Kobe jerseys at the house. I got Jordan stuff too. But he just, like, people that don't follow basketball enough just don't realize. And a lot of it is attributed, he had Shaq. And Shaq changed the dynamic of the game. But Kobe was the fucking truth. But not Jordan,
So speaking of the truth, what's the truth in the Diddy case? I mean, like, is the prosecution proving their RICO case?
I personally think Diddy got charged because of the Cassie Ventura video that was released from the hotel, which was just awful, right? What kind of human being stands over a crumpled woman and just beats the shit out of her because she took too long to fix her hair, right? I think Diddy has gotten away with being a horrible human being for a long time. I think the Kid Cudi testimony probably helped the prosecution tremendously if the jury believes that he broke into Cudi's house and burnt Cudi's car. And for people not familiar, the hip hop artist Kid Cudi, and I think his last name is
Cudi.
Yeah, Mess Cudi, right? He testified at the end of last week that he had been seeing Cassie, and that Sean Combs found out, went and broke into Cudi's home, unwrapped Christmas gifts. No, he testified that he went. The assistant was like, "Hey, Puffy's in the house," and he just did weird shit, but left before Cudi got home, and then allegedly had someone destroy and burn Cudi's vehicle. I mean, that's alarming stuff. And arson's one of the predicate offenses. It's a federal prosecution on trafficking and RICO. I think the defense is doing a very good job of saying, hey, my client's a real asshole and did some horrible shit, but he's not guilty of what he's been charged. It is very hard to win when fighting the government, but it's also very hard to convict a celebrity. And the numbers, the data, African-American jurors, when you have an African-American celebrity, it makes it very difficult. I think that there's a good chance he'll get a hung jury and they'll try it again.
I don't think they're going to try it again. They're spending too much time and resources.
They want him.
I don't think they're going to want to go through that again.
See, I think they want him, and I think he's a bad guy, right? I think he did some fucked up shit. I think that in the wake of Weinstein and Epstein and all of that. There is especially the U.S. Attorney's Office, there's a taste for getting these bad celebrities and get consequences for them. And I also think that you've seen clearly the Justice Department focus on people in the hip hop community. And there's questions that might be racially motivated, but there's also a lot of criminality attached to it, I think fairly and unfairly. And I think they see him as, I think they're going to keep going after him till they get him for something.
What about the government coming after him for his property, his plane, his houses, his money, even if that money and those other assets aren't tied to any
that
type of
bothers me
criminal
tremendously.
activity?
Bothers me tremendously.
Is that even legal?
Like if they want to assess a fine, like whatever the fine is associated with the crimes they're prosecuting them, okay, sure. Whatever the fine you want. I mean, a fine is a cost and consequence of a punishment. But, I mean, they are trying for these sweeping, and like if the women who claim they were victimized by him, you know, I think Cassie settled a long time ago, but, you know, if they want to sue him, that's one thing. But for the government to take shit that should go to his children, unless he did illegal shit to get that money, they should not. And there's going to be a robust argument on the forfeitures. And I think they'll have a hard time establishing that this racketeering and trafficking, if they do get a conviction, somehow resulted in this financial windfall, because it seems like he spent a lot of money on it and actually probably hurt him more than helped him financially. But I think it's legal because we built this system where the government can do whatever the fuck they want. But I think it's bullshit. I don't think the case is bullshit. I think Diddy's a shitty human being who got away with being a shitty human being for a long time. And I think he was the facilitator and the ringleader for a lot of other Hollywood stars to be shitty human beings. You know, there's been a lot of quiet shit. You know, all these people talking about Diddy parties, they've gotten real quiet. And I do think there was victimization of young men and young women, you know, teenagers, children. I think there's just a bunch of sexual perversion, and you know, the question is whether it's crime.
When you say young, clarify. Do you mean underage?
Yeah, I mean underage teenagers.
If that was the fact, they would absolutely have some type of testimony to that. They haven't introduced any of that into the court.
Right.
I think if they had something like that on him, that would be the nail in the coffin.
I don't think they have participating witnesses. I think that there was, I think Hollywood, you know, the fact that Hollywood acts like it should be, you know, the entertainment industry as a whole on the East and West Coast act like they should tell all of us and the rest of the United States how we should be living and what our ethics and priorities should be is fucking insane to me. Because what we're seeing in this Diddy case is just how rich, famous people just do whatever the fuck they want constantly, while also getting up at the Oscars and the Emmys and telling the rest of us how to fucking live, which is fucking crazy to me. I think the only reason Diddy's being prosecuted is because the release of the Cassie Ventura beating video sparked some interest. I think they will probably eventually convict him of something. I think that there's a good chance this ends with a hung jury, but I'd say it's probably 60 conviction, 40% hung jury, right? I still think more likely than not they're going to convict him. And I think he's going to get a lot of time in prison. And that bothers me if it's not specifically associated with shit he was convicted of, right? And the defense attorneys are doing a pretty good job. And I believe that Cassie, when you're beaten and abused, you get in this mindset where you think you have to. But they did a very good job with old texts and old communications and old photos and old videos kind of picking apart her position. But I do think that he's an abuser and a sociopath. And I think that the problem is there's not going to be accounting for all those, you know, from Jennifer Lopez and all those other people moving forward. A lot of famous actors who were all about the Diddy party and all about Diddy until this shit happened. And now they all gotten real fucking quiet.
So they got Diddy on a RICO charge. And so far he's the only person that's being prosecuted for these RICO charges.
They're giving immunity to some people.
Okay, so they've given immunity to everybody because right now he's the only person being prosecuted on RICO charges. But one of the other people who was involved every step of the way, at least most of the steps of the way for the freak off parties, was Cassie. Does Cassie have any culpability here?
I think that she probably had some in the procuring of male sex workers. I think she was, but I think they are appropriately treating her as a victim. I think that he is. I mean, look, I think Diddy is an incredibly charismatic person, a strong personality, and willing to engage in crime. I think I think as we hear more stories, and the way. There are stories that the public aren't aware of, like the relationship between Sean and other artists that worked for him, and whether or not there was discord, whether or not him and Biggie. It's an onion that I think if you peel back, you're going to see worse and worse conduct on Sean Combs' part, and that has left a lot of people. He's the one that benefited the most off other people's art, right? I think he's a bad guy. I don't think that they're gonna, I think they've got a difficult road. I still think they're going to get the conviction. I don't know. I think that you had one of his, who testified last week. You had an assistant of his testify with full immunity. And I think we're going to hear more testimony. They said that they expect the trial to last 8 weeks, and we're just, a week and a half into it?
No, this is, we're going into the third week.
Okay. That's right. So 2 full weeks, and we start on Tuesday. I don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting, but I think they'll do like Weinstein, and whether they win or lose here, they'll charge him with something else somewhere else, another part of the country, and keep coming at him because they want him. And that's the thing with the government. When they decide they want somebody, they'll typically get you,
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Charles Adams, a.k.a. Big Angry. You know what? That's one of the things I wanted to ask you about. Man, how did you come up with the name Big Angry? Or did somebody give you that?
So when I was a young policeman, there was a dispatcher, Bryant Corbell, who called me Big Ad, right?
Big what?
Big Ad.
Big Ad.
My name's Adams,
Okay,
and I was, I'm 6'8".
Yeah.
Probably 6'7" now, shrunk a bit, lost all my hair, got fat. But and it just kind of morphed from that, got a little fussy, big fussy, big angry,
But do you remember the moment the Big Angry became
it was just,
your moniker?
I think
did somebody call you Big Angry? Or?
Yeah. Somebody called me Big Angry joking, and it just kind of revolved from that.
Your name is Big Ad. They need to call you Big Angry.
Right. That kind of stuff. Right.
And
and I'm not particularly an angry guy, but it's a great marketing tool. Having a nickname helps in the legal world.
But if I'm being defended by somebody, I want the Big Angry guy to defend me.
What you want, whether it's a guy or a woman, is someone that really, like, there were years where I just lived the law, right? Like I fucking lived it, and I loved it. And that's kind of why, unfortunately, I got these other businesses to make money now. So I really am limited my practice to just personal injury stuff, and I've got partners in that. But it's, you just want, we got so many apathetic people. Like you want an attorney and a criminal defense attorney that inspires you and actually believes in your shit. And there are some great ones, right? And then there are more mediocre ones that are just taking a check and just trying to plead you out. But yeah, and the angry guy is often, if they're angry for you, but.
But you're one of the best at doing that, man. That litigation is something different. Like all lawyers are not created equal.
No.
And litigators, that's an entire different lane, and it is to be respected.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of lawyers are awful people, right? I don't want to suggest that there are a bunch of saints in the practice, but you are to be willing to be confidently willing and able to get in front of a box of jurors and convince them oftentimes not to believe their lying eyes. You know, you're selling them bullshit, and to be successful in it is rare, right? And, you know, I went on a tear in the late 2000s where I just won a bunch of trials, some of them that I shouldn't have won. And it's, you know, I mean, it's everybody's got their own shtick, you know, and for a long time I was really into it. Like I enjoyed doing it. I was always very aware of client outcomes. So you have some attorneys that just want to try cases for the thrill of trying a case. You know, I would always try to resolve it without a trial if possible, right? I'd always try to achieve the outcome that I thought was right for my client or fair or great for my client and not fair without the trial. But you got to be into that shit. And, you know, there was a period of my life when I was into it. I think I'm kind of over it, you know, but you know, that was then.
That's that. On to the next. Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Adams. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks for
coming
having
on
me.
the show.
I appreciate it. A lot of fun.
No more talk. Yeah. All right. Good stuff. Good stuff.